There's a very nice verse in Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita specifically that speaks about the important point, um, the principle of attaining the Supreme. It's actually found in the 8th chapter, 5th verse. And Krishna tells Arjuna, Antakale chamam eva smaran muktva kalevaram ya prayati sadmad bhavam yati nasti atra samshayaha. Arjuna's feeling on the battlefield of Kurukshetra was that so many of the people who were standing there were not just his own kinsmen like the Pandavas, but there was also his cousins, the Kauravas, and they were on the opposite side. So in the first chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna's argument was, why should I fight this war? Because the people on the other side are also my kinsmen, and therefore there's no reason for me to do this. If I don't fight this war, then they will continue to be alive. By the end of the first chapter, despite all his arguments, whenever we put forward an argument for something that we believe in, if we really believe in it, by the end of the arguments, we should feel convinced. But the thing is, by the end of the first chapter, the beginning of the second chapter, after all his arguments were put forward, and that's about 60 to 70 verses of arguments, Arjuna finally turns to Krishna and says that right now I am confused about my condition. I'm also perplexed about where I stand, about the way I'm thinking. And therefore then he turns to Krishna, who for so long during the war and even before the war had always been his friend. He has always seen Krishna as a friend. But now he turns to Krishna and he says, Krishna, I am a soul that is surrendered to you now. And therefore you kindly instruct me and show me the way. The reason why Arjuna asks Krishna for guidance is because even though he had all the arguments on paper, in his heart he did not feel satisfied with them. Sometimes we do that to ourselves also. We create so many arguments in our minds generally to just justify an action. And very often at the end of the day, even if the mind justifies an action, the conscience doesn't sit well with the action. And therefore the conscience is not the product of who we are. Bhagavad Gita and our Shastras tell us the conscience is coming from Paramatma. And Paramatma is none other than the Super Soul, Krishna. So in the 15th chapter, 15th verse, Krishna tells Arjuna unequivocally, Sarvasya chaham hriddhi sannivishto. He says that I am seated in everyone's heart as the Super Soul. And then he says, from me only, remembrance, forgetfulness and memory, they actually come. Knowledge also. So therefore, if we want to remember the instructions of Krishna, we need to accept his instructions as the Super Soul within, as our conscience. That is very important. The more we are able to hear the Super Soul, the more we are able to abide by the instructions of the Lord, which are found in all the world scriptures, then the closer in touch we will be with the Super Soul. Then the voice of conscience will speak more strongly in our hearts. But when we are not performing actions which are not in line with Shastras, which are very often not based on Shastras, which are philosophically speculative in nature, then the result is that as time goes on, we lose touch with our Super Soul. Which means then our conscience, the voice of our conscience becomes quieter. And sometimes the voice of our conscience becomes silent. And that is when we start doing things that we should never do. Which is why in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna also says, Ye me matam midam nityam anutishtanti manavaha shraddhavanto anasuyanto muchanti tepi karmabhihi. In the 3rd chapter, 31st verse, Krishna tells Arjuna that ye me matam, one must follow my injunctions. Matam in Sanskrit means injunctions. One must follow my injunctions. And you should follow my injunctions, not your injunctions. The problem in this world is we come up with our own injunctions. And when we ask you or you ask us, where did you get this injunction from? Then what happens is very often it's either concocted by us, which means it has no authority, or it is a mishmash of things that we have read. which again leads to confusion. That is why the word chastity is used so many times in the Bhagavad Gita. In the material world, we talk about chastity in terms of a relationship, the chastity in relationship. But the word chastity is derived from the Bible, it is derived from the Quran, it is also derived from the Gita. And the word chastity actually means to be chaste to the instructions of the Lord and not to come up with your own speculative understanding of life. This is the challenge that we face in Kali Yuga. And very often, if we don't have the discipline to follow Shastras, then what happens is, Shraddhavanto anasuyanto. We don't have the faith and we are envious of Krishna because we cannot accept his supremacy. Then what happens is, our future, right, is always going to be in difficulty because the mind is always disturbed. The mind can only rest on something which is sanctioned. And every time we come up with our own concoctions, the mind will not be peaceful. So this is a very important point. And that is why in today's verse, Krishna says, whoever at the end of his life quits his body. So at the point of time of our leaving, Krishna tells Arjuna, at the end of our life, if we quit our body remembering me alone, then he attains my nature. In the verse after that, Krishna says very nicely that whatever state of being that we are at the point of our death, that state of being we will attain. So if at the point of your death you are remembering your husband, for example, then Shastras tell us in your next life, you don't attain liberation. You don't attain peace and freedom from the cycle of birth and death. You come back to this material world and you go through the same cycle of birth, death, old age and disease. And the reason is you're remembering something which is material in nature. So therefore, if we are very attached to our money and at the point of our death we are remembering all our bank accounts and our bank balance, then we will come back to this world again. And you all know that everything in this world by nature is temporary. The most wonderful thing Yudhishthir Maharaj said in this world, in Mahabharata, is that every day someone is dying. But those who live genuinely believe that they will live forever. That is the most wonderful thing in the world. When we attend funerals, when we attend wakes, we look at someone who has passed, it never strikes us that the urgency of life is upon us. That we should start now planning, because life is actually a preparation for death. That is the definition of life in Shastras. So for a devotee, death is something that is not difficult to understand, but important to embrace. And the faster we embrace it, the more prepared our consciousness will be. And in case we think that, we can just spend a lifetime in sense gratification and towards the last few years of our life, we will become very sadhu in nature. It doesn't happen. Because a lifetime of conditioning cannot be unconditioned very easily. It's very difficult. Which is why we have to start as soon as we can. There was a very beautiful story in Bhagavatam. Chitraketu Maharaj is a great devotee of the Lord. And he had one great pain in his heart because no matter how many wives he had, he didn't have a child. And so one day Angira Muni came to the kingdom. And Angira Muni looked at Chitraketu Maharaj's face and he felt very sad because he looked very, very morose. So he said, King, you have everything. What ails you? He says, I have everything except a son. I want a child. So Angira said, it is not in your destiny to have a child. But nevertheless, if you want something, then take the fruit and give it to your queen. You have many queens, but give it to one of them and they will bear the fruit of the seed, which means you will have a child. So Chitraketu had so many wives, but he chose one wife and he gave her that fruit. And in due course of time, she became expectant and she had a child. But one thing that was very important before that, Angira Muni told Chitraketu Maharaj that you will have a child if you want from this fruit. But this child will be a great source of happiness and a great source of distress. And Chitraketu Maharaj was thinking to himself, all children are like that anyway, right? We have ups and downs with them. One day they are very fine, next day they are not. So he thought, never mind, I'll just take it anyway. And so he took it. And the child was born and the kingdom became a great source of happiness because of the child. Chitraketu Maharaj was very happy. But the other queens became very envious because he gave so much emphasis and attention on his queen who bore him the child. And so one night, driven by envy, they poisoned the child, and the child passed away. And next morning, when the mother woke up and came to see the child, and she saw the lifeless body of the child, she could not take it. It was so painful. It's very painful when loved ones leave us. Whether they are young, whether they are old, it doesn't matter. Loved ones are loved ones. We feel the pain. And so Chitraketu Maharaj, when he came to realize that, Bhagavatam tells us he swooned away in so much of grief, not ecstasy, but grief. And so at that point of time, the whole kingdom was plunged into grief. And then Narada Muni and Angira Rishi came back. And this time Narada Muni asked Chitraketu Maharaj, what is it that you want? You wanted a child, and you got the child. And we told you that this child will be a source of happiness, but also a source of distress. And now you are feeling the source of distress because it is part of the material world. That everything that comes to you will give you happiness for a while, and then either it will leave you or you will leave it. And then there will be moments of distress and pain of separation. This is part of life. Why are you not understanding this point? Chitraketu Maharaj was so besotted with grief that he had no choice. He said, I just want that my child come back to me. And so Narada Muni smiled and said, all right, I will grant you that boon. And because he was so powerful as a person, right, and as a wonderful devotee, he then turned to the child and said, O soul that has left the body of the child, come back, come back. And so the child woke up, and the child looked around, and Narada Muni smiled at the child and said, my dear child, your father is here, and he's in great pain of separation from you. And the child looked at the father, who was Chitraketu Maharaj, and looked at Narada, and he asked something which is foundational in Bhagavatam. He said to Narada, which father and in which life? And then Chitraketu Maharaj woke up, because he didn't realize that he was just one father out of many, many, many fathers that this child had had when it assumed a material body. And so for the child, when it had come out of its body, it didn't make a difference which father, which mother it had, because every life we had fathers and mothers. And in one life, in one particular life, they were everything to us. And yet in the next life, Shastras tell us, we have no memory of them, no recollection of them. Today we put so much emphasis on our family and our children and everything that we have, not knowing that we have done this time and time and time and again. And by Krishna's mercy, we cannot remember. Because if we could remember, like they say, one family and one challenge is enough in one life. To remember every life is going to be crazy. And so Chitraketu Maharaj came to his senses. And that when he came to his senses, he told Narada Muni, I have realized the futility of trying to hold on to my child, because I am just one of many relationships that this child has had. And yet I thought that I was so precious to the child, and the child is very precious to me. But I've done this so many times, and yet I've not understood the purpose of life. I've not understood the purpose of life. And so Chitraketu Maharaj came to his senses. And Narada Muni then gave him a very powerful mantra to meditate on. And in a few days, when he meditated on this mantra, he gained the darshan of the Supreme Lord as Sankarshan. And after that, with knowledge revealed to him, Chitraketu Maharaj lived in this world as a devotee should live in this world. So in Shastras, the point of death that we should remember is that our time is running. And if we want to honor those who have left, then the true way to honor them is to understand what we should do about the aim of life, and what we should do to actually be aligned with the instructions of the Lord. Because no matter how many times we come back to this world, without alignment, we will continue this samsara chakra, this wheel of birth and death and birth and death. Some people ask this question, why should there be birth and why should there be death? But we don't understand that for everything that is born, everything must end. The nature of the world is that everything must deteriorate. It just doesn't continue. And that is something we have to accept. In the Buddha's lifetime, he was sitting under a tree in a village, when this lady Gautami came to see him. And Gautami's child had just passed on. And so she came to the Buddha and said, I've heard that you are so great a personality, you can revive my child. And Buddha said, I could, but you must do this. I will give you mustard seeds. Go to every house in the village and ask them for more mustard seeds from their house and give this to them. But the only condition is that house must not have known any form of death at any point of time. If you can find such a house and you bring back mustard seeds, I will revive your child. And Gautami thought, this is a great chance. Surely there must be a house that has never known death. And so she spent the whole day walking and walking and walking. And by evening, Buddha had finished his sermon. And Gautami walked back. And when she came back, she did not look forlorn. She did not look sad. She looked very peaceful. Because she had come to the realization that the Buddha wanted her to realize. And she said, I understand now, my dear Buddha, why you told me to go and why you told me to try and find this house that has never had death. Because everywhere that I went, everyone told me, well, last year someone passed away, 10 years ago someone passed away, 2 years ago someone passed away, yesterday someone passed away. And there was no end to it. And Gautami realized that what I am going through is as common and as evident as everybody else who has gone through. Therefore, we should understand that death is as natural to us as life will be. The only difference is how and what are we going to do about our life. We celebrate those who leave us best in that way. In Bhagavatam 11th chapter or 11th canto, there is an interesting story also. You know, there are birds known as Kulinga birds. And these Kulinga birds are very close, they are family. So Bhagavatam says, one day there was a Kulinga family of birds. Mother bird, father bird, and baby birds. And they were so happy together. And they thought this is happiness actually. Until one day the father and mother went out to get food. And the babies were left alone in a nest. And a hunter had been watching them, unknown to the father and mother. Just like death is always stalking us, unknown to us. And we think, no, it won't happen now, it'll happen later. But we don't know it's always around the corner. And then the hunter came and took the nest down. And instead of killing the birds immediately, he set a trap. And so the Kulinga birds were in the nest and on the floor, on the ground. And when the husband and wife came back, they saw the birds on the ground and they were completely shocked because they knew that a hunter must be nearby, and that's why the nest was down. In their grief and their need to protect the birds, they ran. The mother ran first. And as the mother ran, she immediately ran to the nest and she was caught immediately into the trap. And once she was caught in the trap, the hunter waited because he had one more person to get caught. And so at that point of time, the father, he entered into the trap also. But as he entered into a trap, he was so besotted by grief that he was going to lose everybody, that he didn't realize that his time was also coming. And so the hunter caught all the Kulinga birds and he took them away. And Bhagavatam ends that story by saying that while we grieve and we concentrate on those who are going to leave or have left, the real value we give to those who are leaving is to understand how to live well. And we celebrate their life by changing the way we live so that we become more spiritual in nature rather than material in nature. This is the point of all sastras and all points of death. And this is why Krishna says that if you live your life in this way, being conscious of me, then at the end of your life, antakale chamam eva, antakale, at the end of your life, chamam eva, if you are only remembering me, eva, right, only me, then at that point of time, as you quit your body, as you leave your body, you will not come back to this material world again, but you will go back to the eternal kingdom of God, which is spiritual. And the beauty of living a spiritual life is that you don't have to wait till death comes to feel spiritual. You can feel very spiritual even while you're alive. That is the whole point of living, right? So when we talk about God consciousness, we're not talking so much about afterlife, because some people will say we have no proof of what happens after life. then forget afterlife. What about now? Now we can change the way we live. Now we can become more God conscious. Now we can become more, we can plan our lives in such a way that Krishna becomes the center of it. So then Krishna, in the same chapter, in 8.7 of this verse, Krishna then says, Tasmat sarveshu kaleshu mam anusmara yudhyacha. He says to Arjuna, so you must fight, Arjuna, but at the same time you remember me. That is how you live your life. Don't run away from your duties. Your duties will always be there, but you spiritualize what you are doing. Whatever that you do, you make sure that the goal or the employer is not some employer that you're signing on to. Your employer is always Krishna, and therefore do what you can, do to the best that you can. But always remember that whatever that you are doing, the results are never yours. Because if the results were yours to control, then everybody will be doing very well, isn't it? But the truth is, nobody can say with certainty that whatever that we do, we will be very sure of the results. We don't. Very often we don't actually. So this is a very important point. So please remember this, that in Sastras, the beauty of Sastras is that they speak the truth. Sastras are not here to mollycoddle you and to tell you everything will be fine in material life. It won't, because it is the nature of this material world. For every moment of happiness that you have in this world, there is an equal moment of distress that is coming. It is just a matter of time. For some people it comes earlier, for others it comes later. And if you think, oh, in this life I had a great life, that's good for you. But whatever you have incurred in this life that is not great, then welcome to your next life. Because there you will have to bear the fruits of what you have done. So this going on and on and on, this samsara, this wheel, it has to be cracked at some point of time. Otherwise it is very difficult. You know, just to conclude, there was a king once who wanted to be immortal because he feared death so much. And so he came to the sadhu and said, please make me immortal. And the sadhu said, not a problem. You cross over this river, go to mountain. There are 2 mountains. And in between the mountain, there is a lake. Swim in the lake. And when you come out, you will be immortal. And so the king took so much trouble. He swam and swam. No, he walked all the way past through the mountains, and he came to the lake. And when he came to the lake, he was just about to enter the lake when he heard some moaning and groaning just outside the lake. So to his surprise, he saw a gentleman. He was just lying down, very, very old, very emancipated, like he had not eaten for a long time, but he was alive. And he said, my dear sir, why are you here? The lake offers you immortality, and you look very ill. You look like you're going to die. And the man said, I drank the water. And after drinking the water, I realized that I became old. But as I became old, I found that I couldn't die. I just continued living. And as I went on living, my children got tired of me because this man is not going to die. And eventually they died. And I saw my grandchildren. And eventually they died. And after a while, I could not stay with anyone because nobody remembered who I was even. And so now I'm sitting by the same lake that I thought would give me happiness. And now I have stopped eating. I have stopped drinking. But I cannot die. And the king thought, if this is immortality, I want no part of it. Maybe I should go back to the sadhu and say, I want immortality, but without old age. That would be better, isn't it? So he goes back to the king, the sage, and he says, give me immortality, but the caveat is, let me be young when I'm immortal. Sadhu says, all right, you go to the other side, and there are 2 mountains. You cross the mountains, and you will see a tree. And on that tree, there's one single fruit. You take the fruit, and you eat it. You'll be immortal, and you'll be very young. And so the king went there. And when he reached that point, he was about to take the fruit in a very remote place. He heard people shouting at each other. And he thought, who's shouting at each other here? He turned the corner and he saw 4 men, very young. And they were all shouting at each other. And so he turned to the first man and said, why are you all shouting at each other? And the first man said, we are shouting at each other because we were living in a village. We took the fruits and we never died. And we are all very young. But because we never died, this man next to me is my father. and the man after him is his father and his father. And none of them have died, and all their properties are still under them, and I should be the heir to the property. And they say, no, I can't give it to you because I'm waiting for my father to die, and he can't go because he's waiting for my grandfather to die. And so we are fighting over the property. And then the king realized that whether you want to be immortal while young or you want to be immortal while old, immortality is not the answer to peace. It is understanding and accepting that this life is meant for a higher purpose. That is the key to peace. Animals eat, mate, sleep, and defend. Human beings eat, sleep, mate, and defend. The only difference is we do it by deluxe editions. We're sophisticated. We have a nice bed, nice house, and in this we eat meat, we sleep, we mate, and we defend. So Shastras say, if you don't want to understand the value of life, and if you're so attached to that which is gone, then that is non-different from animal life. In fact, Shastras have a term for such a thing. Shastras call men and women who think that way two-legged animals. That's the only difference between human life and animal life. So human life is not meant, right, for sense gratification. It is meant for tapasya, for austerity, for purification. It is meant to tolerate the challenges of life, but always looking to spirit and not matter. In that way, at the end of our life, as Krishna says, we will quit the body and we will remember him. And in that way, we will attain his nature. And Krishna says at the end of it, of this there is no doubt. No doubt. So this is the royal road to eternal life. And whatever that I've spoken is from Shastra. And you will realize that Shastra never minces its words. It speaks the truth. And the truth is always liberating. Thank you, Madhu Mataji, for giving us a chance to reflect on all these beautiful points of passing, of death, and of living, actually. Are there questions, comments? Always good to hear from devotees. Yes, Mataji, please.
So, we've been listening last time as well. I was here, and it's very profound. How do we actually tactically practice this every day? Because, when we are here, we listen to it. It makes a lot of sense.
I know.
But then you go back and then you're working and...
Exactly. That's a very good point. The only way to put this into practice is to actually insert, it actually means that you have to insert Krishna at practically every junction of your life. And to do that practically in Kali Yuga, the recommended way is to be able to chant his names. That's why devotees have bead bags. We have japa beads, for example. Just like the Christians have rosaries, the Muslims have their beads. We also have this chanting. And therefore, just like we sit down every day to meditate, meditation in Kali Yuga is really about chanting the names of the Lord. So if you chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, that's one beat. And then you chant and you chant. If you finish 108 of this mala, takes you about 15 minutes if you take your time, 10 minutes, if you're a little faster. Devotees make this a very important part of their meditation daily. In the morning, if you wake up before sunrise, Brahma Murta hour, and you chant your malas at that time, you will find that the spiritual consciousness awakens in you. If you offer whatever food that you eat at home to the deities before you eat them, then what happens is that the food that you eat becomes spiritualized, and it actually becomes what we call prasad. And the effect of prasad, Mataji, is that there is no karma to eating prasad. If you make it a point every week to go and attend a satsang, where you are in the sadhu sangha of devotees, just like what Prabhu and Mataji has done now, you'll find this regular satsang, for example, will invigorate you. It will give you the foundation of becoming more conscious of your spirit than matter. And then from Monday to Friday, you do your chanting, Do your reading. We all have the Bhagavad Gita to read. So daily the devotees would read 15 minutes, half an hour, 1 hour of the Gita. We take notes, we study the Gita, we discuss the Gita. So you find practically in our life, a few hours of the day would be spent with spirit. So by the time you do this in the morning and you go to work, your consciousness at work is very different, Mataji. Because your consciousness is filled with chanting the holy names, your mind is very bright and clear, you have read the Gita in the morning, you have offered food, you have taken prasad, you are now spiritualizing your life. And then at work, you understand that work, just like Arjuna worked, he worked for Krishna. And so you work for Krishna. And at the end of the day, you resign from your work, not the railway, but you resign in the sense that you offer the results to Krishna. And when you come back in the evening, devotees come together again. We have Arati, we chant Krishna's names, we read about him, and before we sleep, we chant his names again. So it's really about changing your lifestyle. Because until you manage time and change your lifestyle, Krishna remains something far away. Like you just like you said, it's nice to hear, but until it practically comes into being, it will not take the effect of peace and bliss that you want, you see. But the real test then will be your mind. Because your mind will give you the favorable arguments. Do I really need to change my lifestyle? Is it really that serious? Can't it not wait until I'm 55 and I've withdrawn my CPF? Or you withdraw it later now. But isn't that the way it is? Because most people say, why start early? You know, why start early? But in our congregations, we have children. Like my children, my daughter, my son, they started since they were born, right? They were in it. And they have grown up with it. And you look at all the devotees who have come. They are holding very good jobs. The children are studying well. They are integrated into society. But their lives, at the center of their lives is Krishna. So it doesn't take away your ambitions and what you want to do, but it actually gives meaning to all that you do. So your question is so important, because we have so many of these programs every time we go, but hardly anyone will ask us, how do we go on with this? You know, and this is a very good question. I hope it helps, Mataji.
It does.
Mm?
It does.
Thank you very much. Yes, Mataji.
So you have this consciousness, and you want to, it gives you that message from within to be good and fair and just to everyone, and you want to give a lot of love. But there are times in the day and there are times in situations where you feel you need to protect yourself because people are, sometimes you feel taking advantage or not fair.
Yes.
And then you have this inner consciousness, you need to protect that. So how do you have those great relationships plus also have protect you as your soul and not hurt your soul?
Yes. See, Mataji, when you start chanting the holy names dedicatedly, you'll find that the holy names gives you the power of control over your own mind in such a way that you know when to draw boundaries and when not to draw boundaries. That knowledge doesn't come from a material source. It comes automatically from a spiritual source. Ananyas chintayantu mam ye janaha paryupasate tesham nitya abhiyuktanam yogakshemam vahami aham. Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, to those who are exclusively devoted to me, I give them what they lack and I preserve what they have. So if there's anything lacking in us at the moment, if we don't know how to protect ourselves, a material way to do that isn't going to help, because it's just a material skill you learn. You cannot sustain it. But if you dedicate yourself to changing your life and putting Krishna in the center, then automatically the way to draw boundaries, the way to be able to protect yourself becomes second nature to a devotee. It is not something that we have to learn. It's not even something that we need to be aware of, because Krishna makes us conscious of it at the time when it is needed. Arjuna's problem in the Bhagavad Gita was he couldn't draw a boundary. He was constantly being hurt by the Kauravas, but he just kept accepting it because he was seeing it from a material point of view. It's only when he surrendered to Krishna that he understood that he had to draw a line. And he had to say no is no. But till then he thought spiritual life means everything is fine. But spiritual life means you have to fight a war and you have to draw boundaries. You know the saying, isn't it? Good neighbors build strong fences. You know, in America and many places you find there are no fences between two houses, right? And well, US is US, you know what happens there. But traditionally in our Vedic system, there was always a fence between one house and the other. And the fence did not mean that we didn't trust each other. But the fence meant that if your cow was in your pasture and my cow is in my pasture, if there's no fence, one day the cows will move to different place and we will have a misunderstanding because your cow did this and my cow did that. But once you draw a boundary, then your relationships become better. Because you know your cow will be there, my cow will be here, I will take what is meant for me and you take what is meant for you. So Krishna consciousness has a very strong view of these things. But it is a byproduct of your sadhana. If your sadhana is in place, all of this is revealed very well. A devotee has a good sense of understanding things because this knowledge is revealed knowledge. It is not cultivated knowledge from a material sense. We can go for all the seminars we want, but even then we struggle to apply all this in our own lives because there is no sense of spirit. It is all matter. But the moment we place Krishna in the center, then all of these are byproducts. Knowledge is a byproduct, realization is a byproduct, happiness is a byproduct, understanding is a byproduct. Is that helpful, Mataji? Mm-hmm. So remember, devotees doesn't mean we are sadhus all the time, right? A snake doesn't have to bite. It can just hiss. And sometimes devotees also have to do that. That's why I love the Bhagavad Gita. It's set in the middle of a battlefield. It's not in some cave where two sadhus are talking about life, because you and me are in a battlefield. It is the most relevant scripture in the world because it speaks about how to live in a world which is not black and white, but very gray. We live in a gray world where many things that look good in one side cannot look good on the other side. How do you handle that? The truth is we are living in a gray world and the Gita accepts it. Krishna teaches us how to live in a gray world. Thank you. Shall we chant Krishna's names? And will we chant louder?
Yes.
Very important, because the more loud you are, the more you can hear. What is the science of hearing? The science of hearing is that you must be able to speak it loud enough. When the little child starts crying, everybody's attention is on her because she is loud enough to be heard. So when you are loud enough to be heard by your mind becomes engaged. If you are not loud enough, your mind is distracted. Try it and you will see that's how it is. That's how children get the attention of parents because they know when to cry. But she's a sadhu, by the way. She's one of those amazing sadhus. It's amazing. For a child that young not to make noise till now, some of us don't even know she's sitting there actually. Right? And she's smiling. She's a yogi.